So as I said, I'm going to live in these slides here for the next few minutes and just kind of walk you through the high level about what we've been doing and where we ended up with this harvest capability. And then I'll put that aside and show you the actual product in action, how simple it is to use. So for those of you that are new to AVAIL and new to hearing the story about what we're doing with AVAIL, really, at a very high level, our goal is to help everybody, help really the end users. We always start from there backwards to say, what is everybody trying to do on a daily basis at their desk as they're working in this industry with all of this information. So what we've been trying to do overarching with the AVAIL platform product is help people see and find that information, ultimately see if that's what they need to get their work done, retrieve it. And then the other, so we always talk about AVAIL being agnostic to the kind of content that you're managing inside of the platform, but more and more important as time goes on, I think, the fact that we're also agnostic to where that content can live. So, whether it's in one of your cloud drive services that you're using or on a local network, we're kind of agnostic to that as well. So we think that's an important piece of the long-term picture, and that is that this content's going to be all over the place. And ultimately, can you have one interface in front of you, the AVAIL interfaces, desktop and applications, and are you able to use that to get back to this information? So this is a kind of a new diagram that I've started using both internally and now obviously sharing externally about just thinking about the root cause of some of these problems. So when we set out working with AVAIL, one of the primary criteria was to leave content on the networks, and ultimately a file system is where everybody stores all this information. So if you look at this little iconography here, the diagram of the file folders, what I always call file folder hell, folders, nested folders, and then ultimately files that are living in those folders, which is what we're using to, creating in these applications and using to do our work every day. So that was really, the initial problem that we set out to solve was, can we put a new front end on this? Can we tackle all the weaknesses of what it means to have files stored in a file system? Don't have to list those. I think everybody understands the pros and cons of storing information that way. But one thing that you maybe haven't thought about was, if you begin to look at things, like Revit, a Revit file, an RVT, a project file. So now you think about what your interface looks like in Revit, this little screen grab there that I have on the right. So you can really think about that data that's inside the file basically living in some sort of a rigid hierarchy, much like you're used to thinking about a file system, and these end up being these kind of rigid hierarchical organizations of data. So for us, we tackled the file system and began thinking about, at some low level, what those problems were and how to solve them. You can also think about what we're doing now is actually tackling these very same problems inside at the either file or application level. So we're taking the very same learnings and tools and applications that we've developed and applying it to really just these kind of hierarchical organization of information. And they can work okay, but everybody knows once you start to scale, they become unwieldy and very difficult. So you'll hear us talking about a lot about virtualizing that content. So this goes back to the theme that data stays wherever it is, but we index it, we touch that data, and then we kind of free it up to do new things with it by virtualizing it. So you can think about, one way to think about what we do with AVAIL is we kind of take that information, virtualize it after we've indexed it. We let you now put some new context around it. So we use a metaphor of channels, if you're new to AVAIL, that lets you think about how you want to organize data. We're working, if you are a customer and you've been following our roadmap, we're working on some new metaphors like workspaces around projects and obviously archival of that kind of project data. So there's kind of this new metaphor layer about the way this data can be thought about. And then ultimately there's bunches of features that we develop that sit on top of all that let you do new things with that information. So tagging it, searching it, filtering it. So it's one way to think about what we're doing is, where is all this data stuck? Where are these kind of rigid hierarchies that we're forced to work with this info in? One of the things that you'll see us doing is continuing to kind of knock down those. Can we touch that data? If we can touch that data, we can let you consume it in some new ways. So that's just kind of a broad background about what we've been doing. So we released the 4th generation of our technology, the AVAIL Desktop 4.0, released last fall. There was a lot of work done by the team around improvement in search, really simplifying that, and then continued focus on visuals. So, you'll see this when I give you the live demo, but we on the front end of AVAIL Desktop, this is just a screen grab. Our channels now have what we call channel cards. So it's just concentrating on this being a very visual experience for everybody to look and find this kind of information. Once you're in one of these channels and you're looking at things like, details, we have this preview panel, which you can see high resolution previews. You don't even have to have Revit on your machine to be able to see this kind of information. So this was a big focus again of the platform, was all the work being done on search simplification, a lot of attention to these visuals and being able to produce these visuals and make sure that they're front and center as part of this process of looking for and finding the information that you're looking for. So so we took kind of everything that we had done, all of that work, focused on it in a very general way, and we're kind of simultaneously already working on applying those same concepts and principles to very specific things inside of Revit. So we had already built a little utility that we called Harvest, which was about trying to abstract details out of an RVT file so that you could index those as individual RVTs. So we basically dusted that off, and we knew that the way that our customers are managing their Revit libraries, families, I like to say, are pretty easy. Those are discrete little files or little RFA files. So we obviously handle that. The tougher content management problem inside Revit is everything that's not a family. So almost everything else has to be stored in an RVT file or a template file of some type. So we really went to work, dusted off that Harvest, and what became Harvest 2.0 was this kind of, let's apply our learnings and go start to solve, specifically be able to solve some of these problems around managing this content that's stored, what we call container files. I've heard most customers, I think, call them container files, container libraries. I've heard warehouse files, whatever you end up calling that. It's basically everything that's not a family that you're forced to store that information in an RVT file. And if you go back now and think about that diagram that I said, you've got this data now that's kind of trapped in that RVT file. You can think about, as I'm getting ready to show you what we do with Harvest, that kind of opening that, virtualizing that information away from there, frees it up for people to look at it, find it, think about it in new ways, and not worry about that data is still stored in that RVT file. So that's what Harvest 2.0 is all about, and I'm going to kind of walk you through specifically now what our goal was, what we accomplished with this, and then start to dig in a little more technically about what we're doing. So for us, this was about simplifying Revit content. So this is a mouthful, but we created this element level abstraction or virtualization of that information in an RVT file represented in AVAIL. So for those of you, I'm sure if you're on this and you knew this was about Revit, I don't have to tell you that everything in Revit behind the scenes is an element. So a sheet's an element, a family's an element once it's in that RVT file. So we began looking at what all information at an element level can we touch. What information are people managing in these container libraries, and can we help to improve what it means to manage and use that information? So we kind of set out with this to let you kind of continue to centralize that container management in a single or multiple RVT files of your choosing. We had as a goal that we wanted to continue to support whether your choices are to leave this data on-prem or deliver it through the cloud. So we have ways to do that. And then we also made a pass at our AVAIL browser for Revit. We actually did a UI UX kind of pass on that to simplify that. And then ultimately there were some new features that were related to bringing this harvest information in. You can now bulk load content through the browser, and that includes via harvest across multiple container files. So basically the users have no idea where this data is coming from. It can be coming from multiple container files and they don't know, and you can actually bulk load across multiple container files. And then we had some requests from our customers to add a load as group feature, which we did, is tucked in there as well. With the Harvest 2.0, which is really a utility, and I'll show you this and demonstrate it. There's a really simple utility that you use when you're managing your container files that lets you publish this data out into AVAIL and kind of choose what you're going to publish on that front. And then just some details. We have what we call the Revit Tag Generator, which is the way we get parameter data out of Revit files when you index them. Harvest takes full advantage of that, so you can drop in a specific data that you want to harvest or that you want to bring in as tags. Harvest reads that very same Revit Tag Generator and takes advantage of it. And then I'll give you just a quick, data has always been important, and obviously a lot of our customers use the analytics and data that's generated of what's going on in AVAIL to their advantage in managing their operations. So we did add the capability into the analytics on the harvest side. You'll continue to see on the usage side what people are using, but kind of new to this, we're on the reporting side or the publishing side. And I'll show you, you can actually see when things were published that were new. You'll know when things were updated. You can actually pull dates to see when those things were updated. And it'll help you from a BIM manager standpoint understand when information was published or changed. So that's kind of just a broad overview. I'll dig in now. Let me take a sip of water, and then I'm going to dig into when we talk about an element level virtualization. I'm going to show you which elements we're currently supporting, and then at some point I'll talk about we're actually working on adding some new ones. And I don't know if I said this earlier or was before I got cut off, but I do have a couple of my colleagues on here that are monitoring the chat and Q&A. So if there's questions that you have along the way, shoot those into the Q&A or chat, and we'll pick those up when I kind of finish running through this, and happy to answer any questions that you've got. So when we talk about these container libraries, as I said, everything that's stored, inside of a Revit project file, an RVT file, ultimately these things are all referred to as elements at some low level. So we're our kind of first target for content that was being managed by our customers as library items that they want to deliver, things like these drafting views, groups, lots of work going on in groups, legends, sheets, schedules. You can manage families in there, and system families, which have to be stored in that RVT, are all supported by Harvest. Basically, you can think about, and again, I'll show this to you, but it's a pre-process that you run. So you basically update your container library with your data in it, and then you open up this Harvest interface and choose which of that data you want to publish. Ultimately, when you publish it in AVAIL, the desktop, that ends up looking like individual items. Every item that's in that container file ends up looking like an individual item. You can think about those as individual files. They don't have to be, though. You can be referencing back to this single RVT file. So that's the really powerful thing about it, is that it frees up for it to look like individual items to search, find, drag and drop. I'll show you, it actually works really well. You can just drag and drop right into your project. And this is what I meant by simplifying it for the end users. They're unencumbered by having to understand that this data is in an RVT file, and you can't drag and drop an RVT file, all of those things that make the end user experience very difficult around this kind of content. So for that consumer, they get to, find and that data is coming from that single RVT source, or you do have an option of publishing out individual RVT files on the consumption side. And there's some reasons, especially if you're doing, there's some reasons just on a speed standpoint. If you've got a giant RVT file that's grown in size, there's an overhead to just opening that file and getting a single piece of data out of it. So you pay that price every time you have to open it. If it's a few seconds, it's probably not a big deal, but if you put a lot of data in there, that's one of the rationalizations for splitting the RVT files up into smaller, or you can actually go all the way down to each of the, and Harvest will do that for you automatically. It'll save every one of those elements out into an individual RVT that is used on the distribution and consumption side. And then that just makes the consumption experience more pleasant because it's fast. And this also plays into whether you're hosting on-prem or in the cloud, can have a difference on this. So that's the basic kind of overview of what we're doing and how this works. I like to say that this is like having your cake and eating it too. So you're from a management standpoint of this data, you get to continue to manage this stuff in a single RVT file, which is nice for being able to keep everything up to date. And then your users win because they're not stuck in trying to consume out of that container file, which can be very cumbersome. Just some things to think about. You don't have to put all the data in one container file. You could split this up into multiple container files. This is just an example of what you could do and a way to think about it. If I was going to be delivering sheets, those sheets are probably made up of drafting views. And those drafting views are probably made up of detail items. So all of a sudden, it might make sense to be managing all of those items, those 3 items in a single container file because they're related to each other. You may be representing those drafting views out individually, but that could be your drafting view library and your sheets that are using those or taking advantage of them could all be in one container library. And then that way, if you've updated one of those detail items, it's going to ripple through your drafting views all the way up to your sheets. As far as a management standpoint, you might put your legends and schedules, in a different container library, and then ultimately just have all your system families maybe over in yet another container library. So that's completely up to you to decide, what's the best approach, how you're going to manage it, who on your teams are managing it. And ultimately, all of those items can be being seen in AVAIL in a single channel or multiple channels, whatever makes sense for the users to be able to see that information. So this is the cake and eat it too. Ease of maintenance on your side for managing this data, ease of use for the end users and how they're going to find it and consume it. So that can be a very powerful combination. And then really this ability to now drag and drop those individual virtualized elements directly into a project is very powerful. And this is where I think the simplicity comes in. And I'll demonstrate that here in a minute. So that's where we are. I'm going to take another sip of water and then I'm going to pop up AVAIL, show you what this stuff looks like, and then show you, what it means to bring this into Revit. All right. So I just drug over, you should be seeing on my screen, the AVAIL desktop. I usually always start with this kind of minimize like this. For those of you that are new to AVAIL, this is a desktop application that you use to get to this information, consume it. Think of it as replacing Windows File Explorer. I'm just going to go full screen so that you can see it. So these are what we call channels inside of AVAIL. And I'm going to go right into, I've got a library. You can see here that I call my AVAIL Harvest library. I'm going to double click to go in there. And what you're going to see are several hundred probably individual items. There's 335 in this channel. And as you can see down here in my filters panel, this ranges from drafting views and families all the way up through sheets and system families. So each one of these items is going to show up individually. I'll just show you drafting views because those are nice visuals or sheets. Here's my drafting view library. I can see these as individual items. They're all searchable. So if I knew I was looking for that solar screen, I can identify it. I can select it. And if I open my preview panel, I'll get a high resolution preview. This is all zoomable so that you can see this. Again, we get a lot of kudos and feedback from our customers because of things like this, because there are people, you have a PM who isn't using Revit that can still get in here, see this information without even having to be in Revit or even having Revit installed on their machine at this level to be able to see this information. So that abstraction, actually, at the end of this, I'll show you we're working on mobile, and it'll make a lot of sense about now that we're abstracting this data away from the actual RVT files, that you can see this on mobile devices. Very powerful from that standpoint. All of this information was, including these tags, came in automatically as part of the harvest process. So all this information is being driven out of the container library. You can have your own custom parameters that you want also being stored in there and being pumped into AVAIL just to make this a nice, easy process for being able to get back to this information. So very powerful from that standpoint. What I'm going to do is, let's just kind of start with these system families. So wall types, any of your typical system wall families. Let me dock this over here on the right side of my screen, and I'm going to bring Revit up and show you what this means to use this inside of your Revit projects. So let's do this. Let me actually go back and open like a sample project. All right, so I'm just going to open up the sample project that we're all tired of looking at. Anybody'd like to supply us with a really cool new demo project, we'd be happy to take it. I, for one, would like to start using something besides this project. Let me just go into a 3D view here. So for those of you that are on the call that are AVAIL users already, we have what we call the AVAIL browser that runs inside of Revit. And if I select a piece of content here in my library, you're going to see this little icon take a couple of seconds. What's happening there, that's that time it takes to open that container library to be able to get this data. So in this example, it may take me a few seconds for this data because it wasn't quote unquote hot. But now that it's open, it's immediate when I go from one of these to the other as far as looking for that information. What I want to show you though is that you don't have to use this browser anymore. So I'm just actually going to turn it off, and but I'll still use one of these system families as the example. So here I am on my project, and I can go through here. I could take that system wall family, do a simple select it, drag it over onto my current project, and AVAIL is loading that out of that container library, bringing it into the current project, and then going ahead and putting me in modeling mode so that I can begin modeling with that wall type. So very powerful to think about doing that. If I were to go over here and create a sheet, and let's go over here to my library and go into, say, some of those drafting views again. Same thing. So I can find my, drafting view that I'm interested in using. And again, I can, I've got Guardian turned on here, monitoring what I'm doing, but I can just drag and drop that directly from AVAIL interface library into my project. AVAIL is loading that, plucking it out of that centralized container library where that was stored, bringing it into the current project, and it's going to put me in placement mode to let me drop that right on the sheet. So pretty powerful from that standpoint. This is what I was harping on about the simplicity. Didn't have to pull up an interface, see everything else that was in that container file, use all of the advantages and the tools that we've built around AVAIL for organization, search, simplifying, managing, seeing, and then simplifying what it means to bring this information into the project. So very powerful combination, I think you'll find, of that new capability. The other thing I will show, if I turn the browser back on, if I do multi-select over here, this is the multi-select, and as you notice down here below, I could bulk load those all at once into the project. I do have content here from multiple container files. If I scroll down here in my tags, you'll see that this data, everything in this channel is coming out of 2 different container files. So if I were to look at what's in the Revit standards, so there's those legends, it looks, oh no, there's lots of data. So I could go to a system family, and then let me go back here. If I were to choose a system family, let's see if I can just find one. There's some wall types, a wall type, and I'll just scroll down here and find a drafting view that's coming out of one of those other container files. There we go. Multi-select both of those. What we'll see in this of our project with one click.
It seems like your audio switched from your headset to your camera, maybe.
Yep, I'm not sure why that switched, so I just went back. Let's see if I can get my microphone back to the one I want.
Sounds like it might be the right one now.
Yeah, sounds like the right one now.
All right, hopefully can you hear me now, Todd?
Yep, you sound good.
Back to the right mic. Okay,
Yep.
I'm not sure why that dropped. All right, so hopefully that makes sense, right? The bulk loading. So now let me kind of switch to the publishing side of this and the management side. I'll just show you really quickly how easy this is to work with. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put Revit full screen, and if I go up into my add-ins, you'll see that I have a icon here called AVAIL Harvest. So I'm just going to click on that, and it's going to basically pop up an interface that is looking at my channels inside of AVAIL. So basically, if I pop AVAIL back up here and show you what I've done, let's go full screen with this. So I'm going to go back home. I have another channel that I created called my Harvest Container Libraries. So if I go in there, you'll see I've got 3 RVT. These are my container files that I use to demo and experiment with. So all I had to do was index those into a channel of AVAIL. So here's where I manage those. And then ultimately I created another channel that was for the output, right, for my users to be shared as part of the library. And that's what I was in earlier, this Harvest Library channel. So those are my 2 channels. What that ends up looking like here in this in your interface inside Revit is you basically point to the channel where your container libraries are. There's those 3 container libraries. I'm going to choose that I'm going to work on my drafting views. And what Harvest is going to do is actually open that as the live project. So you could either be doing your editing from here or have done that and are ready to just open this up and publish from. So it's now open. That's my Revit container library file is opened in Revit. And now it's asking me, where is my destination? Basically, where's the output going? So I'm going to publish it. And it's I'll use the word smart. It'll remember where you published each of those containers to. So by default, if you're just continually publishing, you don't have to worry about re-choosing that. It'll remember those kinds of settings. So here you can see I'm publishing output to that Harvest library. I could switch where I'm publishing that info to. And then the really only other choice you have is, are you going to leave that in the central container file, or do you want to have a Harvest bust those out into individual elements on the consumption side? So I'm going to leave them in that central container file. And then we'll give you the choice of what are you going to publish. So by default, it'll just kind of check at the high level. So here are groups. Here are drafting views, but I can drill down and make either choose to publish them all, or I may come down here and say, let's just go publish these 2 because I've updated them. And I'm just going to say start. And what you're going to see is that will start publishing. While, I've already got those published, so it's not going to mean a lot. While that's doing that, though, let me just use that to pop over here and show you that we actually, on the reporting side, I'll just show you some reporting tools that I've just been experimenting with, but you'll get the idea. So here you can see that I'm seeing everything that in this that I've harvested. We're taking advantage of those create and update analytics. So I can tell you drafting views that I've published, created, how many of them were updates instead of initial creation or publishing. We break that out by the different items, elements that are being published. You'll be able to see who within the organization did that. And then over on the right, what you're seeing are, these are the actual items that were published. And over to the right, I got to get the date in a better format, but that's actually the date that this happened. So for instance, if I wanted to say, hey, we had schedules, or let's go down here, these system families, here's all these system families that were created, the date that that was published on, but there was an update to one of them, one item, one system family was updated, there it was, and there's the date that that was updated and who did it, who actually performed that that publishing update on that item. So we haven't put any new updates. We're working on some updates to our standard analytics dashboards that we'll push out to everybody, but that gives you an idea of the kind of on the management side, the kind of level that you could start to see this information. And of course, once it's out there, you'll get the full view of what people are using and how they're using it. But that's pretty much it. It's that simple on the tool's that easy. Where's your container library? What do you want to publish out of it? Where do you want the data to go? And at that point, all of those are going to show up, including the generation of all the high resolution previews. All of these tags came in automatically. So it's a nice, easy way to start looking at managing these libraries of this kind of content inside of AVAIL. Let me just show you one other thing and we can see if there's any questions and open this up for questions. I've kind of hinted that we were working on mobile. I've got two little screen grabs here that I can show you. This is actually a screen grab I took from my iPad, but basically you can log in and then see this very same information. So what I think is powerful about this is that because we're virtualizing this info away from that RVT file, the data is still in the RVT file. We're just virtualizing this information away from it so that you can see it and consume it and make decisions and do things. So the fact that you run this pre-process and we create these nice high resolution previews of this, you're able to now search that. That could be on your iPad or iPhone or an Android. We're supporting both iOS and Android. You can see that on your iPad, and what's not reflected here is you'll be able to share. Actually, there's a little share button down there at the bottom of that. You'll be able to share links. If I shared a link back through Teams or Slack or an email to somebody and they were at their desk and clicked on that and had AVAIL installed in Revit, it would actually go back right to that item and be ready to bring into their Revit project. So we think some really powerful workflows and being able to leverage that we're kind of abstracting this information away from those technical files themselves is a very powerful opportunity. And you'll start to see us rolling these kind of new mobile features out sometime this year, before the end of the year. So I think that's all. That's the highlights of it. Happy to answer any questions. What I'll say is that because we're touching these project files and all this data, you can start to imagine that the next step is to do this not with just libraries, container libraries, but actual projects. So here's some examples where I've taken project files and abstracted data away from that, sheets, views, schedules, legends. So the ability to see an entire sheet, being able to, zoom in on all of that. Let me go to one that's, let me go back over here and just show you that. I didn't show you any sheets, but any questions come in, guys? Todd, Abram, that are helping me?
No questions so far.
All right, now's the time to shoot, because after I show you this, if we don't have any questions, I'll wrap it up. Let me drill down to these sheets. So here's some sheets. If I open up that preview panel, again, we'll see this preview of that sheet, and it is high enough res that I could zoom in and be able to read, right, this info. Again, all this without having to have Revit even installed on the machine. So I'll be able to do this very same stuff from mobile moving forward. So lots of new and exciting things that we're working on that front around projects and project information, and being able to get back to it. So That's all I have prepared, but I'm happy to hang around here and answer any questions or see what's on your mind.
All righty, let's see here. Question came in, and how does AVAIL handle multiple Revit versions?
So whenever we have to open that container file, there's two ways to think about this. There's the where's it stored and which version of Revit is it stored in. So by default, when we open that, that's having to be converted to whatever version of Revit that you're working in. So if you're in Revit 20 and the container file was Revit 2019, the act of us opening that with the Revit API means that it's being upgraded, at least in that session, to open it and pull the data out. So that's on that side. If your question is pertaining to on the usage side, kind of the same thing applies. You're not going to be able to, if you publish your data in a Revit 2022 container file and I'm opening up Revit 2021 and trying to get that data in there, you're not going to be able to do it because we can't transfer data from 2022 down backwards. So as long as your container library is in the version that you're working or below, everything's good and your users don't have to worry about which version that they're working out of. So good question. Anything else, Todd?
That looks like all for the moment.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Hopefully that gave you a little insight into what the team's been up to on that Revit front. If you're a customer and haven't didn't dig into it, you should just make sure you can get that downloaded, start testing it out. We have lots of customers that have already started implementing it. It really gets you thinking about changing maybe the way that you're managing some of your libraries of this kind of content moving forward. So encourage you to take full advantage of it. And if you're not a customer and think that this could be helpful in your operation, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to sales@getavail.com and somebody will reach you. And then Todd and Abram are on our customer success team. So you can always send any kind of questions on that front to support@getavail.com. I don't know where success at Avail goes.
Either one works.
Either one of those.
Support will, trigger more. Hey, what's this?
Yeah, it'll go into our ticketing system, and a member of our customer success team will make sure they get back to you and help you out. Thanks everybody for joining, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.